Hello, and welcome to Do You Feel Invisible? I'm Elizabeth Bachman, and I want to talk to you about how you can use presentation skills to be heard. I want to thank you all for being here, and let me just shrink this now so we can see this down here. Great. I had this client once. I'd like to tell you about him. He had a big presentation to give and he was nervous. Yes, of course, he had done it before. He was okay with it, but the stakes were really high this time. And so I asked him, "Do you want to practice? You've got some new material. Do you want to work on it?" And he said, "Oh, no, no, no. I'm way too busy. I just don't have time. I'll just wing it. I'm a pro. We'll figure it out." So he waited and he worried and he worried and he waited until finally, the night before the presentation was due, he called me up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Thank you very much, because he couldn't sleep. Why should I, right? He called me up and he said, "I can't do this alone. I need your help." So we met the next day. And since the presentation was that night, I only gave him 3 things to do. 2 of them had to do with the way he was delivering the material, and 1 was a physical gesture he was doing that sabotaged him. And that night, I got to watch him walk out and nail it. He was great. And as he watched them, they gave him a standing ovation. And the expression on his face as he watched them stand there made me smile so hard my cheeks hurt. This is why I do what I do. That guy was Luciano Pavarotti, singing the role of Radames in Aida at the Metropolitan Opera. So as you've heard, I'm Elizabeth Bachman. I'm a presentation skills trainer. My company is called Strategic Speaking for Results. I spent 30 years directing opera around the world in 5 different languages. I've spent 15 years running an opera program. It was a mini opera company. 8 years training business presenters as a presentation skills trainer. I'm also the host of the international podcast Speakers Who Get Results, and I run a Get It Done mastermind, which helps presenters, women mostly, helps people solve the problems of presenting. So the question for you is, why did you tune in today? Or rather, more specifically, what best describes you? Please write this in the chat box. If you're live, we're doing this, we'll be listening to this, and I'll get a message on what the chat is. If you are listening to the recording, just jot that down for yourself. Do you present to customers and prospects? Do you do most of your presentations in order to get sales? Maybe you present within a company, you present to colleagues in meetings, and that's where you're having a hard time being heard, where you feel invisible. Or maybe you go out and you do speeches, pro bono speeches, on social issues that aren't specifically about your company. My intention today is to help you learn how to get the recognition you want, how to show up as a thought leader, and also how to actually get it done. One of the things that you can do is take the quiz. Quite a few people took the quiz before we started, and I would thank you all for that. If you are listening to the recording, you can pause it right now and go to speakforresultsquiz.com. That's speakforresultsquiz.com. It only takes 4 minutes. And those of you who are listening live, you can do it right now. And you will get a message in your inbox that will help you see where you are strong with your presentation skills and where you might need a little bit of support. Now, those of you who've already taken the quiz before we started this, what did you discover? Did you find that you're maybe not valued for what you bring? Or maybe you'd like to go out there and speak, but you don't know where. You don't know where to go. Or maybe you're just not being heard. Yeah, that's the big one. I'll tell you, I hear people say all the time, women especially, they come to me and they say, well, we are, I have a seat at the table and they listen to me, but they just don't get it. They don't understand my point of view. Or they put up with me because I'm supposed to be there, but they don't really want to hear what I have to say. So it's as if I'm speaking a foreign language. Or even you get our old friend, the he Peters, which is when people tell me all the time, I say something, I have an idea, nobody pays attention, and then 5 minutes later, a guy will say it. And when a guy says it, everybody says, wow, what a great idea. That was fabulous. And I've just said it. Frankly, you'd think with all the progress that we've made in terms of getting women out there in business, you'd think that this wouldn't keep happening, but it still does. And it's not necessarily just men. There are women who do it too. I have solutions for this, so hang on. The reason why I learned all of this is I have a great life now. I've spent almost 30 years with the love of my life. Divide my time between San Francisco and the Austrian Alps. And best of all, I get paid to help people step into their power and really claim who they are. I've been dedicated to the art of great communication since I first walked on stage at the age of 5. And after the show, my mom said, I was the best damn bunny rabbit who ever graced the stage of the Hillside School. And I was hooked. I'll tell you, it was hooked. So I thought I was going to be an actor. And then I realized I was a better director. So I started being a director. Then I started a nonprofit as a CEO, and that was the opera company that I ran. And now I work as a presentation skills trainer. It's all using the same terms and the same tools, just for different results. So the question for you is, what do you really want when you make a presentation? What action do you want them to take? And the question for this is really, who are you talking to? What do you want them to hear? What's the most important part? So write that down. Write that in the chat box. And why does it matter? That's the other part of this. Actually, I'm going to go back to that other slide. What do you really want when you present? The key is, my company is called Strategic Speaking for Results, because what I do is I help people get the results they want. What do you want them to do? Do you want them to, motivate your team? Do you want to have upper management approve of what you want them to do? Do you want to get through with your ideas to people who aren't particularly listening? Do you want to be recognized as somebody valuable? And we're actually doing this in the middle of the global pandemic, and there are a lot of companies that are having a hard time. So maybe the presentations you need to make are also to make sure that you are seen as important and to keep your job. So write in the chat box, please. Why does it matter? This is why I've dedicated my life and my business to helping women be heard, is because women have so much to offer. And I should actually say here that When I'm talking about helping women be heard, I've had the great good fortune over the years of working with women, many women of color. So women not being heard, it's even harder for women of color. Uh, there are many reasons why people aren't listening, but this one particularly about whether women are being heard it seems to be gender-based. I've had male clients who are African American and Latino and Indian, and it's actually from the country of India. And when I ask them about this, you know, are you sit in meetings and they're not listening? They look at me and they go, huh? What? This one seems to be gender-based. And then racial background does also affect that. If you have questions about any of the other issues around diversity, contact me afterwards and we can discuss it. The reason we're talking about why it matters to have women be heard is that women will bring a different outlook. The statistics say that companies that have diverse boards and diversity in the C-level actually have higher profits. A recent study said 19% more profit than companies that are homogenous. The problem is if you keep being ignored, maybe you stop contributing. And there are a lot of women who come to me and say, I saw the problem coming, but they weren't listening. They were all excited about the new idea. And so they went off down the path that now has gotten us into lawsuits, or it has, cost us lots of money without making the profit that they want. So it's important. It matters. What I find is that the presentation skills, whether you're talking to one person or in a meeting or on a stage, boils down to strategy, script, and style. The strategy is about finding the right people to talk to and knowing what you want, what action you want them to take. The script are the words that you use in order to make this work, in order to get these results. And the style is really who you are in the room, how you show up. Because the truth is, only 7% of what people perceive about you comes from your words. The other 93% is how you show up, how you deliver those words. So it's important to work on that. And of course, it all centers around you. You are the key to this. How can you show up to be the best you possible and have them value you? So let's think about strategy for a minute. Who needs to hear you? Please write this in the chat box. Who needs to hear you and what do you want them to do? It's a little bit more, it's another version of what I asked you earlier. Who needs to hear you? What do you want them to do? You identify that first. Please write that down. And then what do they need to believe about you? For instance, if I'm doing a speech or a presentation or a workshop like this one, I need people to believe that it is possible to be heard and valued the way you want to be valued. I need people to believe that presentation skills will help. And I need people to believe that it's worth investing the time to polish your presentation skills so you can get those results. Here's the solution. Match your message to the room. Rule number one in presenting is it's all about them. What is it that they need to hear? And you might be telling them, actually, what is it that they want to hear? What are they ready to hear? You might be telling them what you think they need. But if you don't phrase it in a way that addresses what they want, they're going to tune out. And frankly, nowadays, especially when we're doing everything on um, virtually and on video calls these days, it's really easy to tune out. It's really easy for people to pick up their phones and check their emails. Match your message to the room. Know who you're going to be talking to and what is their style of communication. There again, whoops. And then get allies. If you find that you are not being listened to, it helps a lot to not be the only woman in the room. But even if you are, make a pact, make an agreement with someone that if my ideas are being talked over, you'll back me up. Reinforce her voice, if you will. And if they do that to you, I will do the same. If somebody takes your idea and repeats it, you can always say, thank you for taking my idea. Please tell us, I'd like to hear your take on this idea, so that you acknowledge them. That's very important. You don't want to shut somebody down. You want to acknowledge them. But it's even better if somebody else says, why, thank you for mentioning Janet's idea. That was the idea that Janet just said. Tell me, how do you think we should go with this? Here's another thing. If you have somebody who is obnoxiously stealing your material, taking your ideas, there's somebody who regularly claims credit for your ideas, when you acknowledge them and then ask them what it is, what did they want to do and how will they intend to do it? If it's not their idea, they may not know how to do it. But you could say, well, I've thought about it. Here are some ways that we can do this. So the key is to get allies. The second piece of this is the script. How can you say this so they listen? I do a lot of work internationally, and I'm very aware if I'm talking to a group of Germans, I'm going to phrase it differently. If I'm talking to a group of German men, there's one way I'm going to phrase things. And if I'm talking to a group of German women, there's another way. If I'm talking to a group of Japanese, that's a whole different thing. If I'm talking to my Italian clients, that's a whole other way. So bear that in mind. One of the things that you find often is if you're speaking to somebody who works very fast and is a numbers person, you want to make sure that you include numbers and tell them what's going to be the return on investment if they take your suggestion, if they listen to your idea. People sometimes talk about masculine mode versus feminine mode. And I don't like to say that because I've seen both. We all have both. But if you think of it as single-focused versus multi-focused, many men are single-focused and they can really listen to one thing at a time. They prefer it if you listen to one thing at a time. Many women, but not all, there's a lot of men, are multi-focused. They tend to think of lots of things at once, and you can keep lots of ideas going at once. The problem comes when you have a single-focused person talking to a multi-focused person. The multi-focused person is going to be thinking about, well, yes, and there's this, and there's this, and there's this, whereas the single-focused person needs to go through that one thought process through to the end. And the other way around is where you find a multi-focused person. This is what often happens to women. Someone who is multi-focused, who's talking to a single-focused person. If you're not clear, if you don't have bullet points and a clear through line, the single-focused person is not going to get it. And then they'll get confused, and then they'll tune you out. There's a lot more I can say about this. So if you're curious, just let me know. We'll talk about that later. There again, that's the solution. Make it about them. How can you phrase it in a way that they can hear it? They can listen to you. And I do have to say this doesn't happen overnight. This sort of process, it is a process. Choose the important things. Choose the important speeches. For instance, my client Nancy had a big presentation to give. She had a new VP that she was reporting to, and she was really nervous. But she knew that she'd heard that this new VP was very fast, a woman, and it was a woman who had fought very hard to get to that position. So Nancy was really nervous. She said, people have come out of meetings with her in tears because she says, cut to the chase, cut to the point, whatever. So what we did was we went through Nancy's presentation and we put it into bullet points, but we also made sure to stress what would be the benefit. What would be the benefit that this vice president would get? And here's a phrase that you can use often, actually. You can say, you can explain it to somebody as, and then if you can use your little tagline where you're describing why it is that what you want to do matters, let the vice president turn around and present that at a C-level meeting. It will make the vice president feel better and gives the vice president something to get good points for, and Nancy can get what she wants. So we worked on this, and she texted me actually the minute she came out of the minute she came out of the meeting. She said, oh my God, it was wonderful. She loved it. We were very clear. She loved me because I was very specific, very clear, and she could see the benefit. So that's the key. Make it about them. And the third one is, how do you show up? Your style. One of the things that people do often is they'll sabotage themselves because they're nervous. This is part of what we did with Nancy, is I helped Nancy think about how her presentation was going to benefit the VP. And here's the answer. Realize that you and your knowledge are the gift. If you're coming in to talk about what you want them to do, what you want them to approve, or the idea you have, that's actually a gift. All too often people will say, oh dear, I'm asking them to spend money on something that's my idea. It's as if I'm taking something from them. But actually, if you focus on the benefit, you are the gift. You're giving them a gift. What we did with Nancy was we ran through all the possible scenarios of why this VP was so difficult, why this VP was not warm and cuddly. And part of the problem was the VP was a woman, and the expectation was that she was going to be warm and welcoming. But this was a woman who had fought very hard to get this position. And she'd come from a company that was very male dominated. And she had to, we think, she had to develop this very brusque style in order to survive. And since she was brand new at Nancy's company, Nancy had a lot of history, and Nancy knew where the bodies were buried, if you will. So the VP might have been nervous. The VP was the new person and Nancy was the old person. So Nancy within, intending to bring benefit, to become an ally to the new VP. And that was what makes the difference. So remember, you are the gift. However, with all of that, this works. This is one of the things that I do in my mastermind groups is we get together with women who are in more or less in the same at the same level in their career, but lots of different companies. And we work on those three things: strategy, script, and style. The second piece, though, is that's not it. Don't go to sleep. Once you are being listened to and taken seriously in your company, don't forget to position yourself as a thought leader, as the person they want to keep, especially now as we're going into a global recession. There are going to be more and more people whose jobs are being cut. One of the things that I do in the mastermind groups is we work on how to make sure that the women who are in the group are not the one who gets cut. Or if they have been laid off, then we want to make sure that we work on how we get them and position them as a thought leader, as somebody valuable, so that it's worth hiring, so that the next company is going to hire them. This happened to my client, Doug, actually, is one of my male clients, called me up and he said, things are rough. And I keep being part of meetings where one of my colleagues isn't invited. And then we sit around and we say, we're going to have to cut expenses, and Sally's really great, but we're going to have to cut her position. And Doug said to me, I know that pretty soon the day is going to come where there's going to be a meeting where I'm not invited and they'll be cutting my job. How do I position myself as the person they want to keep? So we are working on his speeches now, on the things he thinks about and what positions him as a thought leader. So this is the next step. Move on to thought leadership. How do you position yourself? This is part of strategy and it's part of script. The good part is you really have to write it once. Once you've written your main thing, what's your thought leadership around your industry? What are the things in your industry that you think could be done better? Or the things, if you're speaking on behalf of your company, that your company is doing well and the rest of the industry could do better? How do you position yourself? By speaking in one of the bazillion podcasts or online interviews. There are video interviews, there are podcasts, there are panels, there are conferences. Wherever you are, anytime you speak, you are being positioned as an expert. So while you're working on this, while you're working on the internal communications, don't forget the external communications. Now, people often ask me, yeah, but I don't know what to say. What could I do that was thought leadership? How do you get out there? How do you get out there on all these things? Here's the question. Here's the answer. What are your pet peeves? What are the things in your industry that you are worried about that are annoying you? So I am giving you, could write that into the chat box, or write that down. I'm giving you permission to complain briefly. But one of the great ways to do this is get together with some friends and maybe you open a bottle of wine or, settle down with an adult beverage and a pad of paper and just bat around some ideas. What are the things that bug you? And once you've identified them, what should be done instead? That is a great way to figure out what your thought leadership piece is. I did this with my client, Doug, and he actually sat around with a couple of friends and came up to me a list. And then we went through his list and we chose 3 things that he could talk about. He does still have a job. He hasn't been cut yet, And the more we work on it, the more I think he's going to use this material to get a better job. Once, but it's always better to move on to a better job while you are still employed. So that's the strategy that we're working on. We've just started, so we're still in the middle of the process. Look at your pet peeves. What's going to be the best thing? And then talk about it. This is a big part of what I do with my clients, and I'll tell you, it makes a big difference. Here's the key. You want to have short-term and long-term plans. Reach out to your friends, find your allies, fix the short-term thing, but don't forget to work on the long-term plans as well. If you have questions, I'll tell you again to go back to the quiz, www.speakforresultsquiz.com if you haven't done that yet, and fill it out. You can see where your presentation skills are strong, where maybe you can need a little bit of help. And I have to say that I will get a copy of these results, and you get a link to my calendar. So if this is something that you want to talk about, you can get a free assessment and a free conversation with me to see how you can use this information. I want to thank you so much for being here. Remember, we are all Wonder Women. This has been Elizabeth Bachman. Thank you very much.